On Tuesday afternoons, Jeff Nichols, a member of our congregation, and I ride together down to seminary and back for a course we're taking. A few weeks ago, on the way back from one of those classes, we got to talking about the Apostles' Creed and the line in it about the resurrection of the dead. And with Easter being near, we started talking about Jesus' death and resurrection. And Jeff said something profound to me. He said, "You know, Leland, my favorite holiday, the most amazing holiday in the year, is not Easter, but it's Christmas." That surprised me. He said, because if God could create the entire universe and every living thing within it, God could surely resurrect someone who died. And he said, but at Christmas, God chose to send Jesus into this world knowing that he would suffer and die. That seemed like a profound statement. At the end of World War II, the German people, Germany was devastated. It was in ruins. And people asked the question, who is to blame for this? Who is to blame that our country started a world war that resulted in the death of a generation of German soldiers and in the death of hundreds of thousands of soldiers from other countries, that resulted in the death of thousands of innocent people in neighboring countries, the death of 6 million Jews, and left Germany in ruins, in rubble? Who is responsible for that? That we cause this worldwide suffering? Who is to blame? An unusual response to that question came in the form of a play that was written by a man named Gunther Rutenborn, who was a German Lutheran pastor. Who is to blame? The play begins with a group of refugees milling around on the stage, asking each other, who's to blame for this? Who's to blame? Some people said, well, it's obvious. It's Hitler. Hitler and his idiotic idea of a superior race. Who else? Other people said, I think it was the military-industrial complex that made all of the bombs and the ammunition and the guns that were sold, and their proceeds funded Hitler. I think that's who did it. Other people said, no, it was the diplomats. The diplomats allowed Hitler to annex one country and then another, thinking that if they did that, that would avoid the war. A man stepped out of the group and turned around and said, you are all being too superficial. You are not getting to the root of the problem. I'll tell you who is to blame for this. God is to blame. He said, because it is God who created this world and all the suffering in it. It is God who gives people like Hitler the power to do what Hitler did. And the refugees nodded and said, yes, that sounds right. We all love to find someone to blame, don't we? And so they decided right there they would put God on trial for the crime of creation. They brought God down and gathered all of the evidence of all of the suffering that people have in this world. And it took little time for the jury to come in with a verdict. Your Honor, we find the defendant guilty of all charges. The judge thought that was a very serious matter and that the sentence should be extreme. It should be the worst of all sentences. And he said, I hereby sentence God to the worst thing there is. I sentence God to come into this world and live in it and see what people live like in this world that God created, this world of suffering. And he appointed 3 archangels, Raphael, Michael, and Gabriel, to carry out the sentence. The archangel Raphael walked on the stage first, and he said, I will make it so that God is born in the middle of nowhere, born to a young peasant woman. He will learn what poverty is like. He said, I'll make him born in an occupied country, and so he can see what it's like to live like that. I'll make him a Jew in a Jew-hating world. And there will always be questions about his birth, whether or not he was illegitimate. And with that, Raphael walked off stage. The archangel Michael came out next, and as he thought about it, as he thought about the sentence, he said, I'm going to make sure that God learns what it's like to be rejected, to experience failure. He will have such high hopes of the things he wants to accomplish, but no one will understand what he's trying to do, even his family. And in the end, they will all desert him. In the end, he will be betrayed by even those that are closest to him. They'll desert him. That will teach him what it's like to live in this world. And he walked off stage. Gabriel came last, and he said, I'm going to see that God suffers physically like we have to suffer in his body. I will see that he is falsely accused, that he's convicted, that he's scorned and spat upon, and then he suffers a slow and painful death. That'll teach him what suffering is like on this world. And then he walked off stage. The lights in the theater went down. The audience realized the play was over. And in the dark silence, a voice said, God has already served that sentence. God has accepted responsibility for his creation by coming to live in this world, hard as it is. He said, God knows what it is like to be human in this desperately hard world. He knows what it is like to be rejected, to suffer, to be a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. This God is no longer the remote Jehovah. This is God of love, who came into our world, who bore our sins, who overcame sin and death to give us life. I think that Jeff Nichols was right. The astonishing thing is that God chose to send Jesus, knowing